Hi, and welcome to debate night. Thank you for joining us at the Brady Pack. And we appreciate, of course, Brady hosting this event and everybody joining us, because tonight is the Walz debate, where he's going to be debating J.D. Vance. And one thing that we know about J.D. Vance, folks, is that J.D. Vance does not care about this issue of gun violence. And you do. So I'm Matt Littman, a longtime gun safety and political advocate. I'm a senior advisor to Brady, and I'm going to be hosting you throughout the evening. You're going to hear from gun violence survivors. You're going to hear from advocates. You're going to hear from neighbors of J.D. Vance from Delray, Virginia. And we're all going to say the same thing, which is that enough is enough. And there are things that we could do to prevent gun violence. And by electing this Harris-Walz ticket, we're going to do just that. We're going to talk about it tonight. First, of course, we need to mention that this is the 7-year anniversary of the Las Vegas shooting, 2017, that took the lives of 60 people and injured 413 others. And we're here to prevent things like that from happening in the future. We believe in Kamala Harris's vision of the future, Kamala Harris's optimism about the future. We believe in Tim Walz. They're the only people here who are trying to prevent gun violence. So tonight we're going to have this QR code on the screen. I think at the debate, by the way, they also have a QR code on the screen. That QR code is for fact checking. This one is not. This one is for donations. So please feel free to donate. The facts are going to come from the rest of us who are speaking. I promise you they'll all be correct. So you don't need to fact check any of it. Kamala Harris has done so much already on gun violence. We're going to talk about a bunch of those things tonight, and we're going to be reminded. To me, by the way, I just want to mention one of the most disgusting moments of the entire Trump presidency was after a shooting. He said that the only people who wouldn't support gun reform, background checks, were people who were in the pocket of the NRA. If you remember, the NRA visited him the next day, and then he completely changed his view on what should happen. It was a terrible, terrible moment. Kamala Harris is not that way. She's a much stronger person, and she's a great advocate. Tim Walz is a great advocate for us. We look forward to this Walz-Vance debate. We look forward to hearing from people in Vance's own community. So please feel free to use that QR code to donate. All of the proceeds from tonight go directly to the Harris-Walz campaign. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for believing in a better and safer future. Thank you for your optimism. And thank you to Brady Pack again for hosting this event. So please, we have a great lineup of speakers tonight. The first speaker that I'm going to bring in here is the head of Brady, Chris Brown, who's my friend and really one of the great leaders we have in this country on gun violence or any other issue. Thanks, Chris, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Matt, for being our MC, and thanks to all of you for joining tonight. It's a really auspicious occasion. It is obviously the day 6 years ago that a horrific shooting occurred in Las Vegas. I was there the day after that shooting, and I'll never forget meeting many survivors and really internalizing the loss of life that had occurred because of the use of an assault-style weapon, endless rounds of machinery, and a football-sized field distance between the hotel, way up on the 12th or 13th floor, and the people attending that concert. So we're here tonight because gun violence like that and so much else is preventable. And we're here tonight because it's also just before a vice presidential debate. And I'm thrilled to be able to support Kamala Harris as our president and Governor Walz, who are unparalleled champions of gun violence prevention. I'm also here today as the president of Brady, the nation's leading gun violence prevention group, and the chair of Brady Pack, but also most importantly as the mother of 2 daughters who I want a safer future for my children, and that's the future they want as well. And I know that's the future all of you want, or you wouldn't be here. In just a few hours, Governor Walz will join J.D. Vance on stage for the vice presidential debate. Just recently, as I'm sure many of you know, J.D. Vance, I mean, he's said a lot of unfathomable things, but this one for us was truly disgusting. After 4 children and teachers were killed in Georgia, J.D. Vance said, gun violence is just a fact of life. And he said it really just that simple. Well, we have a message for J.D. Vance and so many others like him. Gun violence is not a fact of life that anyone must accept. The stark reality is that better gun laws save lives. We know from the data and the statistics, states that have better gun laws have fewer gun deaths by huge percentage points. This is not a question as to whether or not better gun laws work. We know they work, and we'll never stop fighting for that version of America. As my dear friend Fred, who I'll introduce in a minute, talks about, no one should ever accept that as a fact of life, and he knows. He's here, he's a champion for this cause because he lost his daughter, Jamie, in the horrific Parkland shooting. I'm also here today, like many of you, because I am a Virginian. Because another unfortunate fact is that J.D. Vance, for now, is a fellow Virginian. Like some people who will speak later in this call, Vance is from a community I know and love called Delray. I and my family have a deep connection to Delray. My mom has lived there for decades. It's a community that cares about its neighbors. And I'm here because just like Vance doesn't represent most Americans, he doesn't represent Virginians. And now through Election Day, we will band together to block his path to the White House. I know we can do that. And this is a special Zoom because we get to rally for Tim Walz ahead of this debate, where I am certain a question about gun violence is going to come up. It's a sad reality that we have today, that these are the questions that get asked in a presidential or a vice presidential debate, because gun violence is the #1 killer of our kids. But it's folks like you participating in this movement, participating in these kinds of Zooms, supporting candidates like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz that can make all of the difference. And we can follow the lead of someone who has become a cherished and close friend of mine, the person who I'm so honored to introduce, who really needs no introduction, my good friend, Fred Guttenberg. Fred?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Matt, and everyone else here. Before I start, I also just want to acknowledge Las Vegas today. It's not an anniversary, but it is a day to remember the deadliest gun violence attack in our country's history. With that, I'm going to get started. I also want to thank Brady Pack for hosting us tonight. This is to me how we send a message, not just about who we want elected, but about how we want this to be a core voting issue once that person is elected. And so I usually start these out by telling everybody my story, but instead I'm going to go in reverse, and today I'm going to start in the end. And I'm actually going to start on November 6th, the day after the election, when, well, give or take a few days, depending on how long it takes red states to count. But the day after the election, we will either have to face the prospect of a President Trump and everything we worked for, everything we fought for, stopping, including the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, or we can elect President Harris and Vice President Walz, two true gun owners who understand there's a difference between being a gun owner and preventing gun violence. And they will do everything they can in their power to prevent and stop gun violence. I know it. I've seen it. I've worked with Vice President Harris on it. We've passed, because of Vice President Harris and President Biden, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We have an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And only this past Thursday, I was in the White House with the president, with the vice president, and amazing activists and others from around the country who simply want to stop the next act of gun violence. And during that ceremony, the president signed several new executive actions to A, stop gun violence by taking additional action against not just ghost guns, but 3D printed weapons, as well as accessories that turn semi-automatic into automatic weapons, and B, tackling something that is unfortunately close to me. What happens in schools and school gun violence prevention drills, which are traumatizing a nation of children. And 3, and maybe what's most close to me, those of you who know me have often heard me say, gun violence isn't only about those who we bury, it is also about those who survive. And unfortunately, we have far too many people in this country who have experienced gun violence either because they've lost a loved one, they've been around the gun violence, or maybe they were shot and they survived. And the third executive action that the president signed last week was to deal with the reality of all the gun violence survivors in this country. I bring it up because every single thing they have done during this presidency has worked. Gun violence is way down in America. As I said to my friend Chris Brown earlier today, this isn't rocket science. We know what works, and when we do what works, we see the results, and we are seeing the results. Gun violence is down in America. Now, I said I was going to start at the end and work my way forward. And so let me quickly tell you my story and why this matters so much to me. Because even though J.D. Vance says gun violence is a fact of life, it isn't for you. It is for some of you on this Zoom. It is for me. That beautiful girl over my shoulder, that's my daughter, Jamie. That's an actual artist rendering of a photo of her dancing. And I leave it there on purpose so that she's always standing on my shoulder, pushing me forward. But here's the thing. I visit her at a cemetery. My daughter, Jamie, was killed in school in 2018 in the Parkland shooting. My son was there as well. My son heard the shots that killed his sister. Again, a survivor of gun violence. And because of what happened to my family, because it is in fact a fact of life for us, I will do everything I can to continue the work to fight gun violence, but the work only goes forward if we vote. If we vote for President Harris, if we vote for Vice President Walz, and also important, vote down ballot for a Congress that they can work with. They can't do this alone. And so as I get ready to wrap up my comments, I hope I didn't go over on time. I don't script it out, so I don't time it out. I just want to say this. We're all here for a reason tonight, and it is to donate. I need every one of you to be generous tonight. This, again, is not only about convincing you of the need to vote. This is also about sending a message about this as a voting issue. And we do this by saying we raised a lot of money for this single issue purpose. And so please don't just sit here and listen to all of us to be entertained. Listen to us and open up your hearts, open up your wallets, donate, and also important, check your voter registration tonight, tomorrow, make sure it's up to date and good, and then get out and vote at the earliest possible time that you can. We're going to win this election if we vote. If we vote, we win. So please, don't make this a fact of life for you. Get out and vote. Thank you.
Fred is an incredible advocate for us, and I'm sure that he wishes he did not have to be an incredible advocate for us, but thank you, Fred. I'm going to introduce now a friend of mine, Helen Hunt. Many of you know Helen for her TV roles, her movie roles. You've won a lot of awards, by the way. You've won Academy Award, Golden Globe Awards, Emmy Awards. But I know you as an activist. And even before we talk about the gun issue, Helen, just so folks know, you have a family history of advocacy. Do you mind for a minute just talking about going back to that, and then we'll talk about this? You're on mute. Let's get you off mute.
I know I'm on mute. It's not like you have to tell me. Obviously, I'm on mute. Thank you so much for having me, Fred. I could hear you speak forever. I'm so grateful to get to hear you tonight. Gun violence is down in America. I just want to say that again.
Yeah.
That has happened as a result of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And how badly do we want to not, as a country, go for the fake, motivated by finances, and believe the fake news that sensible gun laws don't bring gun violence down. And if it were a trick based on ideology, I'd be mad, but it's a trick based on money. So that makes me really mad and really motivated to donate myself and encourage people to use the QR code here and donate. What Matthew's referring to is I've always felt a certain pressure, like we all do, to do the right thing and show up for the causes that matter to us. And then I found out that 3 generations back, I have a great grandmother who was a fierce suffragist, so much so that at age 90, when Maine finally passed the right for women to vote, she was asked to be the first woman in Portland, Maine to vote. So it's motivating, and I feel the pressure over my head to show up like all of you do, or you wouldn't be here.
And you do a huge amount. You're doing a huge amount for the Harris campaign. You were just in Michigan,
Selfishly.
for example.
Yeah, I'm doing it selfishly. Fred talked about the lives lost, the survivors, and the fact that this vice presidential opponent candidate is daring to write this off as a fact of life. And he's horrifying, but he's bordering on right. It's so omnipresent. My daughter's a junior now, freshman year. She had a single dorm on the southernmost part of campus, so right on the street. Her window was right on the street. And, I got the call. There's a shooter. I got a FaceTime call, but it was black. I've turned the lights out. I'm lying on the floor and I'm being quiet. She was whispering. So there you are, in real time, hoping that the thin veil that separates Fred and me doesn't get broken.
Yeah.
So I'm one of so many people who've had those nights. By the way, it happened again in sophomore year, and we're just beginning junior year. So
Yeah.
It certainly feels urgent to me.
Did your daughter Helen have to do those active shooter drills in high school?
No.
In
It's
college,
hard to
my
know whether
daughter.
it's hard to know whether you wish that she had to do them or not do them. She just got on the floor, turned the lights out, and called her mom, like any young human being would do.
Yeah.
And we focus on kids, but if you love life on this earth, if you love the work that you do, or love that you get to do it, if you have people in your life who mean something to you, and God forbid, if you have a child, you have skin in the game here in terms of working toward common sense gun laws. And this particular moment, we find ourselves with this opportunity where our vote matters, with a presidential candidate with a proven record and a vice presidential candidate, I think in a way even more moving. I learned recently that years ago, Governor Walz got an A from the NRA. Then the shooting that happened 6 years ago today occurred. And he realized that he can be a veteran, a gun owner, a hunter, and a parent and a teacher. That he has the emotional maturity and bandwidth to hold all of those things. And if you think of moving forward on November 6th, which of these candidates has emotional maturity and an ability to think soberly? Donate with the QR code.
Helen, I remember.
That's why Biden is a hero to me.
Yeah.
Because rather than a commitment to his plan, he realized the truth of the moment and he changed. And the same thing with Walz. He had a history and a relationship with guns. And rather than thinking he had to go left or right, he realized he could stand right in the middle, hold on to his belief and his history and his right to bear arms, and say, we do not need weapons designed for urban warfare that tear as many bodies as possible apart, and silencers to make sure they aren't caught. So to me, that kind of shift in policy and perspective is one of the most heroic things
Yeah.
anybody can do.
Admitting you're wrong.
Admitting you've changed, admitting life has shown you. And the last thing I wanted to share, and then if you want to ask me anything, of course, I'm happy to answer it, but I don't want to take too long, is that thanks to Matthew. Well, first of all, Matthew, you and I got to sit with Vice President Harris before all of this happened and left there and went,
It's true.
whoa, like
Right.
not a lot of people in that room. But Adrian Elrod, who is the senior advisor to the campaign, right when President Biden endorsed Vice President Harris, there was some excitement, and there still is, and we want to keep that going. And she told us, having worked on how many campaigns, Matthew? Whose campaigns?
Yeah.
Many. She said, I can't describe the feeling when you're working to get a male candidate elected and compare that to the headwind you hit, sometimes invisible, when you are trying to get a woman elected. And so many of us are walking around going, this is the no-brainer decision of our lifetime. And yet, so many of the polls in so many of the key states say, don't relax. So for me, what that means is if you were going to write 20 postcards, write 120. And if you were going to donate once, donate 3 times. And if you were going to show up at an event, show up at 3 events, because this is a woman we're trying to get elected. We are busting through a wall of fear of women of color, of strong, smart women. That is the extra X factor here that I think means we all have to quadruple down on what we're doing.
Helen, a few years ago, you were in a movie where you played a volleyball coach in Iowa, right? Do you remember that?
Yes, I
And
do.
one of the first movies I took my youngest kid to in the theater.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I showed my kids how they have to get out of the theater. If somebody comes into the theater, we were at the Man's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And it's something that we should not have to think about.
No,
But
and
it's
if you
something
have
that
a
we
kid who has any potential to be othered, as I do, she meets 2 of the criteria where she could, then it goes up in terms of risk, because those people aimed at the others out there they don't like, now your risk is even higher.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks for, I know this issue is important to you, and I really appreciate you joining us. You're a great
Thank
advocate.
you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Fred, and thank you to Brady.
Thanks, Helen.
That was amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. And hearing what Helen had to say really reminds me, I lived with my family overseas in Switzerland for many years, and my girls at the time were in 4th grade and 6th grade. And I described this as a happiness quotient that I would allowed them to go really wherever they wanted to go. I never thought about public safety kind of risks because really they were not there. And then when we moved back, we went to the movie theater for the first time, something I always loved doing. And we had to leave. I was so overcome with fear about a potential shooting that I just didn't feel safe. And this is something that I think about a lot in the context of what it is to live with everyday gun violence, whether we ourselves are victims or we're not victims, just the omnipresent sense of insecurity and risk that is part and parcel of American life. That really means we're not in the land of the free and the home of the brave, a long way away from it. And we need leaders and champions like, obviously, Tim Walz as a gun owner, obviously also Kamala Harris as a gun owner, who understand that nobody is signing up for a version of the Second Amendment that's a death sentence to our fellow Americans. That you can have a Second Amendment and you can have strong gun safety laws. And we have the person next to speak, who is State Senator Adam Ebbin. I'm so proud to call Adam a friend. He is an incredible champion for so many different things in Virginia. It's a bit dizzying. On our issue, he's an absolute champion. And after a decisive 1999 or 2019, geez, Chris, 2019 election in Virginia, Adam helped lead the passage of seven major gun safety laws in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and he was a leader of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. And I want to thank Adam for being with us. And Adam, the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me here tonight, Chris. You mentioned the work that we did in Virginia when we had a trifecta in the legislature, and we did things to make Virginians safer that didn't impede on people's Second Amendment rights. We passed a red flag law that since then, more than 400 risk orders have been issued in Virginia. That's more than 400 incidents of people potentially in a dangerous situation for themselves or others who were prevented from having a lethal weapon. And we were able to strengthen our background check law. And I was really proud of my work to pass a bill for no guns in government buildings. We also forbid guns in polling places. People recognize the highly charged political environment we have today. And I tried to pass a bill last year that actually passed the legislature that said that you couldn't have assault-style weapons in public, like we've seen at the Alexandria Farmers Market by people who just wanted nothing more than to intimidate people. And the governor vetoed it, which shows why we need national leaders who get it and recognize that we don't need lethal weapons in every situation. We allow our local governments in Virginia to limit guns in public buildings, to limit them at permitted events, and also in our state capitol, we no longer have weapons on Gun Lobby Day. While we wait for a national assault weapon ban, we tried to turn down the temperature by not having them in public. And we've seen in Virginia, like everywhere else in the country, subsequent to the horrible tragedy in Appalachia, Georgia, we've seen more potential threats for school shooters, and that's a toll on law enforcement to run down each threat and make sure, hopefully, that they're not a serious one, but be able to take the founded threat seriously. And there's a lot that we can do by electing Vice President Harris president and Tim Walz vice president. We know that the administration, this Biden-Harris administration, has taken more executive actions on gun violence than any other administration in history, and passed the first major federal legislation on gun violence in 30 years. I'm particularly happy with the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They've held convenings for not just members of Congress, but for state legislatures from around the country to talk about what we can do. And we know that with something like 76% of school shooters getting their weapons from the home and unintentional shootings rising among children, that these efforts are vital. We've got in Virginia, a person killed every 7 hours from gun violence. And in Virginia, like elsewhere in this country, guns are the leading cause of death among children and teens. And it really it hits home when you hear about a shooting in your community. And in my community of Alexandria, which I like to think of as a relatively safe place, we learned that no one is safe from gun violence. Several years ago, we saw several leaders in our community randomly killed at their front doors, just opening the front door to a deranged person who was not permitted to have a gun. And one of them was someone I knew. She was more than a realtor. She was a real leader in our community in Delray, Nancy Dunning. She showed the difference that one person can make in making a community a real community. She started traditions like our Halloween parade or helped with our Art on the Avenue festival, and so many things that made the quality of life in our community a good one, in addition to finding people housing, and helped me in my first campaign too. But miss her and people like her every day and wonder what would happen if they had not been taken so senselessly. So I thank you for your work and thank you for this call. I'm excited that we've got people banded together, determined to do something. And we just have to remember that the Trump Vance Ticket has threatened to terminate every Biden-Harris effort to prevent gun violence on their very first day in office. I mean, Project 2025 would put more guns in schools and parks and playgrounds, even daycares and city buses. And the answer to gun violence is not more guns. It's sensible and smart regulation. And that's what I hope to see in the Harris-Walz administration.
Thank you so much, Senator Eben. We appreciate you so much. And I just want to say, on behalf of Jane King, my mother, I appreciate you telling me she was your best legislative aide ever, but I'll just keep it between the two of us.
She was.
Thanks so much. And we're just so proud and pleased that we can be joined with by other leaders in Virginia who represent incredible constituents and JD Vance. And one of those is with us, Majority Leader Charnel Herring. She was first elected to the General Assembly in 2009, and she was chosen as the Majority Leader of the House of Delegates in 2020. She represents Alexandria City, Fairfax County, and she is a champion for gun safety, criminal justice reform, and domestic and sexual violence prevention. She's also the chair of the Democratic Caucus. Delegate Herring, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. And I'm glad I'm following Adam because he said so much and he's so right. I've always felt that the first thing on children's minds when they go to school is not whether there will be an active shooter, but what the teacher will be teaching in class. I think the Biden-Harris administration has done a wonderful job with reducing gun violence. We've had 20% less mass shootings compared to prior years, but there's so much more work to do. And we know that Harris and Walz have a plan to reduce gun violence. And we know that Trump and Vance do not, and in fact, want to arm our teachers. That's their answer. And so I just encourage everybody on this call to give to the Brady PAC. It's very important that we fund our efforts and make sure that we're supporting candidates who are going to make our communities safer. It's absolutely no excuse that we are sitting back, some people, and think that this is going to just resolve on its own. It will not. It's going to take bold action, and it's going to make sure that legislators and elected officials in the executive branch are taking gun violence seriously. And children should not be filled with anxiety when they go to school. So I just wanted to take the opportunity again to say thank you all for all that you do. Thank you, Brady. And just let's give to the Brady PAC and support our candidates so we can get Harris and Walz to the finish line and make sure that they are in the executive office next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you for speaking with us. I am going to, before we continue, I just want to mention, we lose 43,000 people a year from gun violence. That is way too many. But when we talk about it, sometimes we talk about it just as a number, and it's not a number. And these are people, and we have to keep that in mind, just like Fred talked about before and his wonderful daughter. Liz Dunning is going to speak with you next. Liz works with Brady. She's our Chief Development Officer, and Liz's mother was killed in a horrific act of gun violence. And now Liz also is trying to help prevent gun violence, prevent what happened to her mother from happening to anybody else. So with that, Liz, I turn it over to you to speak with us for a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to be with all of you, though. Like Fred always says, I wish I wasn't. I wish I had a different set of issues that I'd be focused on. But I am here as a gun violence survivor and as Brady's Chief Development Officer. Like a lot of folks, I'm really familiar with that Delray neighborhood that JD Vance lives in now. I grew up just a few blocks away. As a kid, I was surrounded by a diverse group of friends. I lived 3 blocks from the 7-Eleven and my favorite Wild Cherry Slurpee, and I played soccer every weekend. My mom was a social worker who became a real estate agent, wrote the neighborhood column for the local paper. My dad was the elected sheriff. In many ways, it was a really wonderful, pretty run-of-the-mill American childhood. And on December 5th, 2003, in that same folksy, quiet suburban neighborhood filled with Sears houses and bungalows, my mom was shot and killed answering the door of her home. A lot changed after that. For more than a decade, the case went unsolved. And when answers and justice came, it was sadly only after the murderer had killed 2 more people. The details are dramatic and the story is painful. The shape of the pain, the grief, and the loss that my family and I bear is a snowflake. It's unique to us. But the experience increasingly is all too common. 1 in 5 Americans now have had a family member fatally shot. Can you imagine? All that grief, all that loss, those empty chairs, unsaid words, that's not a snowflake, it's a blizzard. But it doesn't have to be. The last 4 years have been grueling work, but we're making progress. President Biden and Vice President Harris have helmed truly the strongest gun violence prevention administration in history. And under their leadership, we've seen the single largest drop in the homicide rate in recent history. Those 2 things are related. They've taken more executive action to prevent gun violence than any administration in history, and they've even established a White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. I was really fortunate to be at the White House a year ago when that office was announced. It's helmed by Vice President Harris. And that told me something really important, something that resonated particularly to me as a survivor of gun violence. It told me that we're not going to keep that grief and that violence and that pain off to the side anymore. We're not going to treat it like something we can't quite talk about plainly, something that might need a whisper, that maybe invites not just fear and vulnerability, but shame. No, we're going to center it. We're going to discuss it. We're going to fight for it until we solve it. Kamala Harris is a fighter, and that's what fighters do. And it's what my mom, Nancy, would have wanted to hear. She was always somebody who was willing to take action to solve a problem in her neighborhood, or, as Adam mentioned, start a Halloween parade in her city, in her world. And I know that right now, if she were here, she would insist, as I am, that we're going to create a better, safer world for her grandchildren. We're not going back. We're not going back to whispers. We're not rolling back this incredible progress. We're not endangering our children and our own lives. We're not accepting violence as part of what it means to be American. We're not holding our own fear without being able to channel it to make progress for a better world. No, we're not going back. We all on this call tonight are going to do everything we can. We're going to make phone calls, we're going to write postcards, and we're going to give right now to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And then we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with them every day until November 5th and every day afterwards, because that is what it's going to take to give our kids and ourselves the safer world we deserve. And we can get there together. It's not going to be easy, but we can do hard things, and we will. If it hasn't started for you, then make it start right now. QR code. Oh, other way, over there. I'm glad to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you to the neighbors of Nancy Dunning who are joining us tonight. Much appreciated. We're all here for the same reason, which is to make sure that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz get elected president and vice president. We're all looking forward to this debate. Our friends Ron Livingston and Rosemary DeWitt are joining us now. Their parents as well, and activists and actors. They do a million great things that you see on screen and a million great things that you never see off screen. So thanks, Ron and Rosemary, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
And thank you, Liz and Fred, for sharing your story. I'm thinking about watching Vice President Harris when she did her conversation with Oprah, and the mom whose daughter was recently shot in the shooting in Georgia recently. She said, "I'm here because I don't want any parent to ever go through this again." And I think about how often we hear that sentence, and that you all do this for us. You all do it for those of us who haven't experienced losing a loved one to gun violence. And then Ron and I got to talking, well, it's our responsibility to show up for all of us and donate again, whether it's our time or our money, because that's not nothing. That's a whole life. That's a whole family. That's a whole generation impacted by trauma and violence. And we know the leaders who are going to fight for us. We see it in the track record of Biden and Harris. We see it in the responsibility of the kinds of gun owners that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are. Ron, you definitely have experience growing up in a family like that too. We're not talking about taking away people's Second Amendment rights. We're talking about accountability and responsibility and communal care and keeping each other safe. That's our American ethos. Like, that's who we are. And I don't want to do all the talking, husband.
Wow. Wow. I noticed when JD Vance, when he's kind of doing a little trick there, when he says it's a fact of life, what he's saying is that it's not preventable, that there's nothing we can do to prevent it. And the truth is, a tornado might not be preventable. Typhoid might not be preventable, but every single gun violence death is preventable. I had the honor and the privilege to travel to a lot of military bases because of the connection with Band of Brothers, and I met a lot of servicemen and a lot of servicewomen, both here in the U.S. and over in the Middle East. And I heard a lot of stories. I saw a lot of things. You know what I didn't see a lot of? I didn't see guns, because they're not allowed to carry them on a military base. They're safely stored and secured in a safe storage facility until they're needed for an exercise. Now, if the Americans who are the most qualified to use these weapons and have the most legitimate reason to have access to them, if our military leaders understand, yeah, the risks are, it's better that we do it this way, I don't see why we can't take that example. I don't know why a 10th grader should have more access than this master sergeant in the theater of war. You know, they say we can't do it, but other countries have figured it out.
Yeah.
They say it's not possible, but it's done. We do it ourselves when we want to. So it's not a thorny problem. It's not too complicated to untangle. It just takes the willingness of somebody like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to say, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
To get that, it takes us to say, we're going to donate that money.
To your point, Ron, 76% of school shootings are a gun taken from the home, right? I mean, this is something that's preventable. You have young kids. How do you think about this in that world?
Well, we've been having the talk since our oldest daughter was 5 because she's Black. Our kids are adopted. So we've had to have the talk that you have to stay on the sidewalk. You can't walk. I used to cut through people's yards all the time in suburban New Jersey growing up and cut through the woods. And I said, you cannot be confused as someone who's a threat. So you don't get to walk on anyone's property because we don't know who has a gun. So we started that conversation young and early. And then we saw it continued at school. It started with guards at the gate. Now there's another layer of perimeter where there's like a booth at the front behind the gate, and then people, and this kind of nervous system deregulation and violence is normalized in their environment. It's just dinner conversation where there was somebody outside with a gun, there was somebody off the freeway, you know. Mercifully, we have not had the experience of others on this call, but we know the statistics are 1 in 5. So we talk about it. They know about it like you. You have to know the exit routes. You have to know where you are. And we can't let this be who we are. It's not who we are. We know it's not
incredibly
who
scary. You know, Rosemary, our security guy, we're at the same school. Our security guys, former FBI. They had former Mossad people working with the school. Like, it's crazy. We should not have to worry about this. Other countries don't have to do this. There is a way to make this better. It is very clear that JD Vance is not interested in doing that, right? So when you think of VP Harris, what are you, in terms of gun violence, in terms of her presidency, what makes you optimistic?
She's already gotten to work on it. I mean, it's so clear, the changes that were made and how much better it got under the Biden-Harris administration. And I feel like they didn't even talk about it a lot. They just did it. And sure enough, the numbers came down. So really, I think it's just a matter of like, let's keep doing it and let's do it more.
I like what Helen Hunt said when she said the no-brainer decision of our lifetime.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that for a while. I think that's what it is. And, you know, we all donate to our Friends Scholarship Funds, walkathons, and whatnot. As we hear, this impacts all of us. This is all of our neighborhood. It's one giant collective. And hit the QR code. I'm going to hit it right now myself while we're here because we kind of can't hit it enough. And thank you, Brady, Pat. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Matt.
Well, thank you, both of you. I know you do a ton, so I appreciate it. I know this issue is important to you. None of us want our kids to have to go through these drills in the schools. It's ridiculous. More than that, though, we don't want them to have to go through an actual shooting in the schools. So, you know, there are ways to make progress here. So thank you to both of you. I really appreciate all that you do. I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you so much. That was an incredibly moving conversation between husband and wife, and following our VP of Development, Liz Dunning. I think it is really hard to marry the heart and head in life, and I like the idea that this is the ultimate no-brainer. This is an issue that touches all of us so deeply, and the solutions before us are so simple. And our kids are paying the consequences in real ways, as we've talked about, for us not solving this issue already. And it's my honor to introduce the next speaker because she and I are friends. She's an incredible leader in my community of Arlington, Virginia. She is our Commonwealth's attorney, Pariza Degani Tafti, and she's a mom. And she called me after the horrific shooting in Georgia and related to me a conversation that I'd really like her to share with all of you. And she texted me, so we ended up talking to each other on the phone. And within a couple of minutes, we were both in tears. And that's partly just a recognition that while it may well be that we have to put certain safety measures in our schools to deal with the threat of gun violence, the fact that we as adults have not passed the most fundamental, most basic laws because of money, because of the gun industry wanting to sell as many guns to as many people as possible, no matter the cost. For us as parents, it is a deep sense of failure and agony to see what our children are going through and the risks they feel because of the threat of gun violence. And so Pariza is not only a leader on gun violence prevention, and I want her to talk about the gun buyback that she helped make happen in Arlington, but also I think as a mom and as a leader, these things are very much front and center. So I thank you, Pariza, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm Pariza Degani Tafti. I am the elected prosecutor for Arlington County and the city of Falls Church. And for those of you who don't know, it's right across the Potomac River from DC. And for those of you who don't know, in Virginia, the Commonwealth Attorney, the elected prosecutor, is the chief law enforcement officer of the jurisdiction. And so I will relay the conversation that I had with my daughter. But you know, I entered this conversation both from a mother and from the chief law enforcement, from the perspective of the chief law enforcement officer. And the conversation after what happened in Georgia went, Mama, are we safe? And my response, I said, I hope so. And she said, has a school shooting ever happened in Arlington? And I said, no, but it's never happened in the places that it's happened until it happens. And she said, she's 12, by the way, is a school shooting going to happen here? And my only response was, I hope not. And then she asked, why did they tell us to hide? Can I run? I'm sorry. I felt safer at school, at my old school, when part of the escape plan was for us to run into the woods. Where do I go now? And then a few days later, we were driving down one of the toniest streets in Arlington, and it's a little strange, but there's an old pawn shop. And the pawn shop has in blaring neon lights, we sell guns. And we go by it every day when I take her to school. And she said, Mama, why did they let a mentally ill teenager have a gun? And she knows I'm involved in criminal justice reform and that I believe in treating kids like kids. And she said, why are they punishing him like an adult when it was the adults that didn't protect him or the kids at the school? And I'm getting emotional and crying now because I don't know how I tell my kid that the person who's most likely going to be shooting at them already knows the lockdown drill. How do I tell my kid, as the chief law enforcement officer in my community, that I can't promise to keep her safe from a mass shooting? And given my role, I have been to crime scenes where people have been shot. I have sat with families whose brothers, sisters, children have been killed with gun violence. And I'm in a position to hold people accountable. I'm in a position to create diversion programs and to work on violence interruption programs, to work on restorative justice programs, to work on gun buyback programs, to help reduce gun violence in the long term. But that conversation and the few conversations that followed broke me because they made me realize how utterly helpless I am, even in my role, and that I cannot protect the kids. And that I will never know when grief is going to darken the doors of my own community. And I've been saying for a long time, and the whole reason that we did the gun buyback and started that process was because we are a country and even a community that is drowning in guns. And I say that figuratively, but I also mean it quite literally, because before and after January 6th, we had individuals who came to Arlington, stayed in hotels here, who were armed to the teeth with automatic weapons, white phosphorus rounds, armor-piercing bullets, like truly weapons of war. The hotel rooms were full of people, but there were actually hotel rooms that were full of guns and ammunition. And it's visceral when I say that we are drowning in guns. And I love that Harris and Walz are talking about the freedom from gun violence as a civil rights issue. And I think it's one of the most pressing civil rights issues of our time. And that's what this election is about. Who thinks our born kids in school should be safe from the constant fear of gun violence? Who thinks that communities should be free from guns getting into the wrong hands? whether it results in intentional, accidental, or suicidal deaths. And that's what this election is about. Who wants to even try to limit what weapons get into whose hands? And there are a lot of really complex issues in this election, but this is not one of them. You know, one side you have thoughts and prayers that mass shooting and declarations that mass shootings are just a part of life. And on the other, you have Harris-Walz who know that this has to stop and are willing to do something about it, even in the face of the many, many obstacles that have been and will be thrown in the path of protecting and preserving our communities. And like, they can't win if they can't reach the voters. I know this as somebody who's been elected, that, you know, every single penny and dollar that comes in goes to something. It goes to literature, it goes to ads, it goes to boots on the ground, it goes to the snacks that we provide canvassers. And so every single dollar goes to a use that directly helps win this election. And so please use the little key. I don't know which direction it is because I've been turned around now, but this way. Please use the QR code. You know, it's giving and hosting canvases outside from my house and going to events and writing postcards and knocking doors helps that feeling of helplessness a little bit. And so I would encourage you to join me in doing all of those things.
Thank you. And what a great point to conclude on there, because when we talk about donations going to the Harris-Walz campaign, what is going to save us? It's those donations, because we have a ground game. And I don't think that the Trump-Vance campaign has such a ground game. And so this is what's going to save us in this election. So when you donate, it's to those things that were just mentioned. Postcards, maybe snacks for the canvassers, but the canvassers. And that is really, really, really important. That's what's going to lead us to victory this time. Sandra Haraji is going to speak to us next. Sandra, I know your story. It's harrowing. I know you were in the Vegas shooting. I know the story about your husband laying on top of you. I don't want to ask you to tell that story because it's probably very difficult, but I'm going to ask you to tell that story even though it's very difficult. So with that, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for being here and for Brady Pack for organizing this. It's hard to share these stories. It's hard to hear these stories, but unfortunately, it's necessary to share our stories. We have to keep the conversation alive. My name is Sandra Howdigi. I'm the Nevada Assembly Majority Leader and a survivor of the 1 October mass shooting. Today is the 7th anniversary of that deadly shooting. It's a day and an anniversary that I dread. I'm reminded of that horrific days, and not just that day, but the challenges I faced afterward too. For me, a lot of my struggle happened after 1 October. I struggled to sleep. I struggled focusing. I struggled like finding any way forward. And it wasn't till February when the Parkland shooting happened and I saw the courage and passion and fearlessness in those young kids. And I knew that I had to turn my trauma into advocacy. I couldn't fathom that I was struggling to deal with something so traumatic. And now we were expecting some teenagers to have to deal with the exact same thing, and yet they were doing something about it. So I stopped letting the fear define me, and I started to become vocal and share my story. I decided that day that I would turn my grief into action, and I've been fighting every day since then at the Nevada State Legislature to pass common sense gun safety laws that are going to protect our communities and our families. Over the last 5 years, I've led the efforts at the Nevada legislature to pass some of the most comprehensive gun safety laws in our nation. We banned bump stocks. We've enacted red flag laws. We've enacted child safe storage laws. We've reduced the blood alcohol content that could be present while in possession of a firearm. We've passed universal background checks. We banned ghost guns in our state. And because of our efforts banning ghost guns in our states, we shut down the largest manufacturer of ghost guns in our country. And that's something that I'm very proud of. I made sure that Nevada would never again be a safe haven for the NRA. But unfortunately, they found someone else to provide them a safe haven in Donald Trump. You know, whether it was blocking the federal assault weapons ban or rolling back regulations designed to keep guns from dangerous people, Trump's record as president was disgraceful and helped the largest single-year increase in homicides ever recorded. Trump even bragged to the NRA that he did nothing to stop gun violence as president. Guns are the leading killer of our children, and he is bragging that he did nothing as president. And his running mate, right? His running mate, JD Vance, calls mass shootings a fact of life. And let's not also forget that Donald Trump has lashed out at families mourning their loved ones, telling them to get over it. You know, under Donald Trump, mass shootings might have been a fact of life, homicides might have been a fact of life, but they do not have to be. We do not have to accept gun violence as a fact of life. And the loved ones that we lost are not something we will ever get over. We need leaders who will fight for us and fight to end gun violence, and that's who Kamala Harris is. As the head of the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, Kamala Harris spearheaded efforts to expand background checks, close the gun show loophole, and pass the first major gun safety law in nearly 30 years. The contrast between the two candidates could not be greater. This November, I believe America is going to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because I firmly believe that we are all tired and we are done running from gun violence. So thank you all for being here today. I usually take this day and I don't do anything, you know, because I don't turn on social media. I don't turn on the news, because everything is reminding me of that horrific day and everything that we went through. You heard from Matt that my story was very traumatic. You know, we were there celebrating my best friend's daughter's 21st birthday, and a gunman in a matter of minutes was able to shoot over 1,100 rounds, killing 60 people because of bump stocks. We're still the largest mass shooting, and I'll never forget the sights we saw that day. People being shot, people on the ground running for our lives, not being able to get out because we were caged in, because there were security measures to get in. And yes, my then fiance, every time guns went off, you know, pushing us to the ground and jumping on top of us to shield us from the bullets. And that's something that no family should ever have to experience. And that's why it's so important that everyone here uses the QR code to support the Brady Pack, to support the Harris-Walz administration, because what we're doing here is making sure that we stop initiating members into the survivors club, because no family should ever have to experience this. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's so hard to hear you having to relive this, and I'm so sorry. It is especially, I think, difficult knowing so many survivors in Vegas with our work, and understanding that while you're here and we're so grateful you're here, the after effect of gun violence never leaves you. The trauma is omnipresent, and it just doesn't have to be this way. So thank you for taking the time with us tonight and sharing your story. And thank you for your incredible leadership and the change that you have wrought in Nevada. It's incredible. Nevada. And it's an inspiration and has really been replicated in many other states across the country. So thank you for everything that you have done. And now I want to introduce someone who is a fantastic leader in schools in Alexandria, first elected to the school board in 2018, serving as chair of the school board, only the second Black woman to serve as chair of the school board in the rich history of Alexandria City Public Schools. Megan Alderton, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Again, my name is Megan Alderton. I'm a member of the Alexandria City School Board. I've been on the school board since 2018. Still serving today, even in obviously what is a very intense climate. You know, I will say before I was a school board member, I was a teacher. I served kids with disabilities since 2003. I have taught in schools, I have led in schools, and no one could have ever told me that in my leadership role, one of the primary things that I would have to be concerned about, one of the primary things that I would have to budget for is weapons abatement. Our children, even in great cities like Alexandria, we have to think about keeping our children safe. Our children have to walk through doors with weapons abatement systems, and we have to make those decisions because you've heard the stories here today. You know, it pains me to hear Parissa talk about the conversation that she has to have with her children because of what they know is happening in our schools. Our schools are battlegrounds. And so instead of being worried about funding, you know, great curriculum and good education programs and funding high quality access for kids with disabilities, closing achievement gaps, we have to set aside dollars to make sure that we can do everything we possibly can to keep war out of our schools. And so, you know, the question that I continue to ask myself is, why are we here? Why do we continue to have this discussion? Why is this not a priority for everyone? I have no tolerance for comments that shootings are a fact of life. No one in the United States of America should have tolerance for a comment that shootings are a fact of life. No one in our country, no child, no one should expect to go to school, to walk down the street, to go to an event, and have to fear mass shootings. What I say is, this is the United States of America. We can do better, and we have leaders who are willing to do better. That is where we need to put our energy. Those are the people we need to support. That is the direction we need to go as the United States. It's really hard, you know, to even say, you know, we're a free country when we are afraid of gun violence. One of the things that really kind of hits me the hardest is, you know, conversations about, you know, AR-15s. These are weapons that are for war. So whatever we have to do, people, we have to get behind leaders who don't think that mass shootings are a fact of life, who are not going to ignore the fact that guns are one of the leading causes of death for our children. We can do better. We have to do better. Our teachers should not be worried about going to school and being afraid of what's in a student's backpack. Our children should not have access to weapons. I don't know what we can say even more. It's not okay. And so let's get behind those Harris and Walz who know better, because when we know better, we do better. And we can do better. I believe that. I refuse to believe that we cannot change the trajectory of this issue. So donate, donate everybody on this call. Donate, knock on doors, get the truth out there, so that the voters can do what we know is best. I don't want to have weapons abatement in our schools for our children. I will make that choice because I will keep kids safe, but that shouldn't be the reality of our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your words. And I think what you've just provided to us is really a rallying cry for each and every one of us, making sure that in these last days before the election, we are doing everything we can to ensure that we elect Kamala Harris as our next president, Tim Walz as our next vice president, because as you said, as you noted, the choice could not be more stark. And I like what a lot of others have said here as well, which is, you know, Joe Biden as president has led on this issue with his heart and his head combined, but he hasn't gone out and talked every single day about all of the incredible combination of activities that he's undertaken to transform the trajectory of gun violence in America. He's done it. He's led on it. And so has Kamala Harris as the leader of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And what we have before us is what we think about at Brady PAC and at Brady is, if you imagine where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have gotten us on a platform of gun violence prevention, where homicides are at record lows with firearms, where we're beginning to make real differences around gun violence prevention in key states all across this country. It's sort of thinking of gun violence as sort of a software version of 1.0. The opportunity with Harris-Walz is to really turbocharge that with a whole of government approach to gun violence prevention. And that's why we at Brady are so incredibly excited about the opportunities before us. But we, the people, as Kamala Harris says, it's in our hands to make that happen. And that means please contribute whichever way this is to make sure that they're elected. And that's what's going to make all of the difference for our issue, whether we save lives due to preventable gun violence or we don't do that. And I also just want to say to all of you joining, thank you so much for participating, and to the speakers we've had. Before I turn it back over to Fred and to Matt, thank you. I think this, for me personally, having participated on so many Zooms for so many years, this has been an incredibly moving and thoughtful discussion, and I appreciate so many of you for taking time to share your stories, share your pain, and share your optimism and hope for what can happen when we elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I don't know, Fred, how are you feeling?
I am optimistic for what is to come. I'm also realistic of how hard the next 30-something days are going to be. You know, this tonight has had a very Virginia-centric feeling, and for a reason, because for whatever reason, J.D. Vance has chosen to make Delray, Virginia, his home, a nice Democratic enclave that he's chosen to settle in. Make of that what you will. But I want to bring the focus back to national, because I can't stop thinking about Parisa, who spoke earlier, and her daughter. And I want to tell Parisa and everyone else listening what we're voting for and what we're raising money for. Back in March, Vice President Kamala Harris came to Parkland, Florida. But it wasn't for a political visit. It was actually a pretty quiet visit. She came to walk through the building where my daughter and 16 others were shot and killed. And what you need to know about that visit is she came even though I made clear to her and the members of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, an office that either continues or stops because of this election. I made clear to every single one of them, this building is still an untouched crime scene, meaning the blood, the DNA, the shards of glass, the bullet holes, the coursework on the desks as if the kids had just walked away from it. And I want them all to know that, to give them an out, to say you don't need to come. This is going to be traumatizing. and none of them took the out. And they came. And Parisa, what I want you to know is they came because they don't want your daughter to know what this is like. They wanted to see this, to understand every single thing that led to that moment, every single thing that made that moment worse, and everything that we can do going forward to stop the next moment like it. So they didn't only see that building, they also saw the building we built to replace it. There won't be a shooting in the building we built to replace it because we reflected everything we could do to prevent it. Learnings around bulletproof glass, unfortunately, recessed glass, so that when a shooter looks through the door, through the window, he can't see where everyone else is when they actually are in the safe zone that they were told to go to. Self-locking doors so that the shooter can get into the classroom. Every single thing we knew needed to be done, we did. I want you all to know we have built schools and law to prevent children and educators from dying from fire. We've been doing that a long time. Nobody's died of a fire in the school since the 50s. Nobody. We can do that now with this. This is the modern threat. But what I also want you to know, and what our future president and vice president know, is this. There's a right way to do this, and there's a wrong way to do this. We have about 115,000 schools in America. Up until 2018, we had fewer than 100 school shootings a year. Since 2018, it's between 400 and 500. Out of the 115,000 schools, that's not a lot of school shootings, but it is certainly on the upswing. And I tell you this number because it puts an end to the lie that arming teachers is a solution. If you don't vote, if we don't donate right now and help elect President Harris and Vice President Walz, so please donate, that is a possibility that we could end up with a president who believes arming teachers is a solution. It is not. And in fact, if that's what happens, you will end up with more gun violence in schools. It's inevitable. And so I am begging you, as a father, where this is a fact of life, where my daughter was killed in a school shooting in 2018, in the Parkland school shooting, I am begging you to donate before you get off the Zoom, or if you're on the stream, to take advantage of that QR code and donate now. It matters. Let's send a message about how important this issue is. And my friends, under no circumstances do I want to hear anybody say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to vote in this election. Get off your you-know-what and vote. Check your voter registration now and make sure you can vote. And vote as early as you can in the process, but just freaking vote. Thank you all.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Chris Brown. Thank you to the Brady Pack and to our great speakers. People speaking from personal experience that, we wish people did not have, speaking about why this issue is so important, speaking about why getting donations to the campaign is so important. It gets the vote out, and that's what you're doing when you donate. When I'm hearing everybody speak, I'm thinking to myself, people love to say that this is a very divided country. And you're going to hear that probably in tonight's debate about the divisions. But it is not on this issue. So let's keep that in mind on universal background checks. More than 9 out of 10 people favor universal background checks. 80% of Americans, including most gun owners, favor red flag laws. Most Americans favor an assault weapons ban, and everybody wants their kids to be safe at school. Now, is J.D. Vance in line with that majority? He is not. Tim Walz is. Kamala Harris is. Last year after the Covenant school shooting, there was a congressman from Tennessee, I forget his name. Truthfully, I don't want to remember it. But he got on TV and he said, there's nothing we could do about this. Well, we don't agree. I know you don't agree. We can do something. Kamala Harris will do something. Tim Walz will do something. Hopefully 4 years from now, we don't have to have the same conversation. So donate and let's go win this thing. Thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight.